Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Grace. It is lovely to have you here, and welcome to September, the start of the Burr months. Autumn is very much in the air. It's a bit of a gloomy day today, but we're embracing the vibes. And I'm gonna talk about all of the books that I read and DNF'd in August. This was probably the weirdest reading month I've had all year. At the start of this month, I was in the trenches. I could feel that reading slump coming on, and I knew that I needed something cozy and fun, a cute little silly romance to get me through it. So I tried several, and I was going to say that I had not DNF'd a book this year until this month, but that's not technically true. I very quietly, sneakily DNF'd A Court of Mist and Fury earlier this year, and I just haven't mentioned it because I feel bad. I was gonna make a whole video about reading that series. It was a whole thing, but it's just not for me. I'm so sorry. I really tried. I really did, but it's not. That series is not my thing, and that's fine. But other than that, I don't think I had DNF'd anything this year until I got to this month. I DNF'd 4 books this month. It was a wild one. So first of all, I tried to read Late Bloomer by Maisie Eddings. This is a sapphic romance about a woman who is a bit of a pushover. She wins the lottery at the start of this book, and of course everyone comes knocking down her door asking for help with money, and she really struggles to say no. So she decides that she is going to up and move, leave everything behind, and buy this flower farm in the middle of nowhere to start her life fresh. But when she gets there, there is another woman already there who claims she is the true owner of this farm. So they strike up some kind of bargain about living together, and you can see where it goes from there. Honestly, I don't know if I can even say I DNF'd this one. I only got about 10% in and just realized it wasn't really for me. I didn't even meet the love interest, which feels like a shame, but I really at this point was just unwilling to continue reading anything that would worsen my reading slump. So I'm not gonna tell you this is a bad book. I don't think I've read enough of it to give you a true opinion on it, really. But I will say it was a little too silly goofy for me. I love a little bit of silly in my romances. They don't need to be 100% realistic and lifelike, but the main character of this book was such a pushover that she started to get on my nerves a little bit. And then she meets the woman who owns this flower farm and is wanting to sell it, and the connection that they form instantly in a friendship kind of way just felt, I was struggling to suspend my disbelief, basically. It felt too perfect. So yeah, I was just struggling to lose myself in this world with these characters because they just didn't feel real to me. But I know that this is a popular book, so I would love to know if any of you have read this and enjoyed it. It's very much a silly, goofy time, but I think that isn't necessarily a bad thing when it comes to romance. It just isn't what I was personally looking for. So then I tried to move on to another cute, fluffy romance, and this was Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake. Now, I read Delilah Green Doesn't Care by the same author last year, and I really enjoyed this one. This is about a photographer who is hoisted back into her family drama and her old town because her sister is getting married, and they promise to pay her a decent chunk of money if she'll come back and shoot for the wedding. And while she's home, she meets one of her sister's old friends who she didn't get on with as a child, but things begin to spark between them during this reunion. But this is also a story about family history and misunderstandings and dysfunctional relationships and trying to move forwards as an adult. I really enjoyed this one, so I thought I can't go wrong with the second book in this series. But this second book just didn't work for me. In Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, Astrid is really struggling with her business. She's an interior designer, basically, and when she is invited to work on the redesign of a local hotel for a TV show, she jumps at the chance to save her business, hopefully. But when she gets there, she finds that she really doesn't get on with the carpenter, who is also the granddaughter of the woman who owns the hotel. And they really struggle to work together, but the people filming charming, think that this is brilliant for views. It's gonna really ramp up the tension of the show, so they really egg them on to have this animosity between them. But of course, this does begin to develop into something else. On the surface, that sounded like great fun to me, but unfortunately, I didn't really like either of the main characters in this. Astrid is incredibly uptight, and I think this is something she's meant to grow throughout the book, but I did struggle with some of the ways that she was thinking, but more so the love interest of this book. She has a very difficult backstory, so you can kind of see why she's in the mental place that she's in, but I just found her really selfish and frustrating as a character to read the viewpoint of. The way she is so stubborn to the point of making decisions without even her family's input and just holding this grudge without really thinking about what is best for her grandma and the future of this hotel. She just really got on my nerves, and I felt like I couldn't root for the couple because of that. So I ended up DNFing this one about a quarter of the way in. I'm unsure if I'll continue with this series. I know there is a third one, and the character that one revolves around I have quite liked in her appearances in the rest of the series, so maybe I would prefer that one, but yeah, this one just wasn't for me again. So at this point, it's a good way through the month, and I am grumpy and struggling with my reading, and I decide on a whim to pick up The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love by India Halton. And I love this book. I'm not entirely sure when this is meant to be set. I would hazard kind of late 1800s. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But this is one of those historical fantasy romances that, if you know me, you know is one of my favorite genres. From the cover and the title, it very much feels Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies inspired, and there are a lot of overlapping world-building themes, but the writing of this was very different, I would say, and it definitely doesn't feel like a copy in any way. This is set in a version of our world where there are magical birds all over the place, and our main two characters study ornithology, where they track these birds, they study them, they try to take them out of situations where they are in danger or putting people around them in danger, and take them to safe spaces reserved for conservation. Now, our main character Beth at the start of this book is following an ornithologist with a very big reputation, but she's also pretty full of herself, and Beth finds that she kind of just goes along with whatever this woman says. She's very polite, and it's kind of her defensive shield to the world. But when a contest is announced to find one particular rare species of bird, with the prize being the Birder of the Year award and tenure at their respective university, Beth finds herself up against her rival, Devon, who is a bit of a rake, but very charming, of course. And the two of them keep getting thrown together while they hunt for this bird, almost as if someone might be pulling the strings behind this competition and behind all of the mishaps that they face along their journey. This was so delightful. I saw a review of this book which I think described it in the perfect way, where the reviewer said that it felt like you could hear the author giggling throughout this story as they were writing it, and that is totally how I felt. I could feel the author's joy, the way that she took classic romance tropes and twisted them in such witty, humorous ways. She just knew exactly what a reader would want out of a book like this, and she played on those tropes perfectly. This was just so funny and charming, and both of these main characters were flawed in such endearing ways, and I felt like they fit together so perfectly. I really cannot recommend this enough. This is definitely one of my favorite books I've read this year, and I think would have been my favorite book so far this year had it not been for another book that I will talk about later in this video. But please go read this. I will not shut up about it for a very long time, I am sure. That is The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love by India Halton. Now, I would just like to clarify that I finished that book on August 25th. That was the first book I managed to finish this month, and then that same day I began a 24-hour reading challenge, so most of the rest of the books I read this month were packed in to those 2 days. And the first book that I got to during those 24 hours was Kiki's Delivery Service by Aiko Kodono. I've been wanting to read this one for a while. As you probably know if you've seen any of my videos, I absolutely adore Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. It's one of my favourite books of all time, and obviously that book was adapted into a Ghibli movie just like this one was, so I was kind of hoping it might have similar vibes in the whimsy and the wit and just the magical fairy tale vibes. I feel kind of about this book. It was easy to read, which I very much appreciated during this 24-hour challenge, but I definitely wasn't obsessed with it. This is the story of Kiki, whose mum is a witch and whose dad is just a normal guy. And in this situation, Kiki needs to decide if she wants to continue her mother's legacy and become a witch herself, which of course she does. And this means that she needs, on a night with a full moon in her 13th year, to fly away from home and find a new town without a witch to become her new home, where she can serve the people of that town with her magic. Now, Kiki's only power is that she can fly on her broom, so when she sets down in her new town, she decides that the best thing for her and her cat Gigi to do together is to form a delivery service for its people. This is very light, it's very classic coming of age. The kind of scrapes that she gets into felt a lot like what I would have read as a child in books that were written in kind of the 90s and before, which makes sense because this book was initially published in 1985 in Japan. This is a recent translation. So this is very easy to get through and very light-hearted and sweet. I think some of the relationships the main character formed with some of the new townsfolk were really wholesome, as well as her constant banter with her little black cat. But I probably won't find this book too memorable, I wouldn't say. This for me wasn't anywhere near on the level of Howl's Moving Castle, but I'm not mad that I read it. If you're looking for a very easy, quick read that has Ghibli vibes, then this is Kiki's Delivery Service by Aiko Kodono. Now, the next book that I read, I had no idea I would love as much as I did. This is my favourite book I've read all year. It's one of my new favourite books ever. I wasn't sure initially if I was going to put it in that tier because it's a very sacred place for me, my absolute favourite books. I've only got about 8 or 9 books that I would give 5-star solid. I absolutely love these above all else. And this doesn't have the themes in it that would normally make that cut for me, but I had such a good time reading this, and all of the books that I've read since have paled in comparison because all I've wanted to do is go back and reread this or read the next one in the series. All I've been able to think about is this book, and this is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. Now, I was forced to read this book because of what I picked out of my TBR jar, and I was a bit apprehensive, honestly, but I really didn't need to be. This was such a good time. This is the first book in a fantasy series. The rest of the series aren't out yet, infuriatingly, but this is set in a world where every few seasons, giant, horrifying leviathans come out of the sea and attack this country, and there are several walls built, one at the sea and then several further and further into this land. So of course you're much safer if you're in the middle, but it's also a lot more expensive to live there. And this story is set in the outer ring, right at the edge of this land where people are in quite a lot of danger. But the other side to this is that the people of this country have found a way to harvest parts of these leviathans once they've been felled and turn them to their own use. So they've formed grafts and medicines, I believe. I'm not entirely sure how it works still, but they call them augmentations, which they infuse people with to give them extra abilities. So our main character in this story has a perfect memory, basically, and he is the assistant to a detective. This is kind of a Sherlock and Watson inspired kind of story. The main narrative of this is a murder mystery, which begins right at the start of the book with our main character, Din, coming across the crime scene, which he then records with his perfect memory of a man who has been killed by a giant tree erupting from his body. And that really sets the tone for the vibe of this book. It's very eerie. There's a lot of creepy plant magic, mushrooms, worms that can infect you. A lot of infection goes on, but I was so hooked. I normally find that I can't read mystery books so much because I'm a huge wimp, and when it's a murder mystery set in the real world, my brain goes, that could happen in real life, that has happened to many people, and I have nightmares and things are bad. But this, for me, was distanced enough from reality that I could read it without it really setting off any anxiety for me, and I was just so enthralled. I was having the time of my life with this mystery, putting all these clues together. I figured some of the plot twists out, but not all of them. It felt like the right balance. I will say, because I'm such a noob with mysteries, I don't know if my opinion will suffice for those of you who read a lot of mysteries. I'm very much not an expert, but I really would recommend this book because I don't think it was just the mystery as well. The world building was so interesting in here, and also our main characters, their relationship, I love. It was so tentatively warm. Anna, this lead detective, is incredibly grouchy and will say what is on her mind even if it offends people and gets her in trouble, and Din is kind of just running around in her wake trying to survive. They are both also very neurodivergent coded, I would say. They talk about overstimulation a lot in this book. Anna a lot of the time has to wear a blindfold, otherwise she is incredibly overstimulated by the world, and some secrets come out about Din that I won't spoil, but they really add some depth to his character. I just cannot fault this in any way, and I cannot wait for the next book to come out. I think it's early next year and I'm going to devour it as soon as it gets here. So, favourite book of the year so far. Weird and wonderful and creepy and just delicious. Cannot recommend enough. The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. Now the next book that I tried to read, I had been really excited for. I've mentioned this book before. This is The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. This is a Regency sapphic fantasy romance. The main character doesn't feel like she fits in high society. She feels like there's something different about her, and one day her grandmother shows up, who she hasn't seen in years, and lets her know that she is actually a witch, and if she comes with her back to the grandmother's island, she will teach her her magic, but she has to make the choice because their line has been cursed to have to choose between magic and love. Basically, if they learn to become a witch, no one can ever fall in love with them. This sounded perfect for me, especially with the introduction of a sapphic romance further down the line, but I just could not get on with the writing in this book. I only read the first 44 pages. I really wanted to get to 50, but I just knew at that point I wasn't going to finish it because the writing just felt like it needed more editing. It was very on the nose. Nothing was ever left up to the reader's inference or allowed to have any nuance. Basically, the grandmother shows up very early in this book and just spouts the lore of their family. It was told in such a frustrating way, without room for character or description. It was just, here's all the stuff, which feels so out of character for a book this gorgeous, that's meant to be cozy and whimsical. It just felt very jarring, and also the lore of this book doesn't really make much sense, I don't think. I don't want to spoil anything. I went into it a little bit more in my 24-hour reading vlog, but the whole setup about the curse that makes them choose between love and magic, once you go any deeper into it, it kind of falls apart a little bit. So I just found myself very frustrated by the start of this book, and I'm so sad because vibe-wise it seemed really up my alley. So yeah, unfortunately, a disappointing one for me. This was The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. Now the next book is another one that I didn't finish, but I want to preface this by saying this is not a hard DNF. This is not me saying this book is bad at all. It's just that I wasn't in the place for this at this point. I was solidly into this 24-hour reading vlog. I was feeling kind of tired out, and I was still reeling from The Tainted Cup. I still really just wanted to be back in that world. So when the TBR jar I was using prompted me towards this book, it just wasn't the right time for me. And this was The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. This is the first in another fantasy series where an endless war is being fought on the ocean in giant boats made out of dragon bones. Now, dragons are thought to be extinct in this setting, but one day word goes out about one being left in the distant reaches of the ocean. So of course everyone suddenly rushes to find this dragon because they think it might turn the tides of the war in their favor. I got a bit over 60 pages into this one and I just wasn't vibing with the world building at this point. I was so lost in the Tainted Cup still in that setting, I think, that I really wasn't looking for a new fantasy series to start. I'm not sure if I will pick this back up again. I think it will depend on if I hear good things about it in the meantime, and my partner Chris really wants to read this one as well, so I think I'll let him get to it first and let me know what he thinks. I think this is one of those stories where the main character is not necessarily meant to be very likable, and those are very hit or miss for me. I have to have something else grounding me in the story because I'm not rooting for that main character, and honestly I don't think I was really rooting for anyone in this book, but of course that may change over time. If you have read this, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Do you think I should pick this one up again? I just didn't find myself hooked, and it was very heavy on the boat lore, which isn't a bad thing. It seemed like a lot of research had been done into how boats work to make sure that this would be realistic in that sense, but I just personally wasn't that interested in how boats work. So I was kind of struggling to get a grip on this story and really lose myself in it. So unsure, may come back to this one at some point. Please let me know what you think and if I should come back to this in the future. But for now, not the right time for it, I don't think. So that is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. And I have one more book to talk about, which I technically finished on the 1st of September, but I'm gonna talk about it here because I read most of it in August and only just finished it after August ended. So this is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne. This is a cozy fantasy that a lot of people have compared to Legends and Lattes. This is the story of a palace guard for a tyrannical queen who ends up falling in love with a high mage, a very powerful woman from another country, and the two of them decide to run away together from their stressful lives and start a bookshop slash tea shop in a little town. This was very sweet. I don't know if I mentioned, but this is a sapphic romance and their relationship was really lovely. It was interesting reading a book with a romance at the heart of it that didn't begin at their beginning. You're kind of going into this after they've been together for quite some time, and the story is more about their trials of trying to start this new life together. I will say this definitely has more action in it than Legends and Lattes. It's still very cozy, but there is danger in here because both of them are running away from their separate lives and their responsibilities, one more than the other, but because of that there is more tension and danger in here. But I did have a lovely cozy time. I have a couple of issues with it. I think one being that both of the main characters seem to have the same core flaw. And I like it when characters have flaws, but I like it when they're different and they can work each other's flaws out in interesting ways. But both of these characters were kind of desperate to sacrifice themselves for the other one, which is very romantic, but it got a little bit repetitive, I think. But at the end of the day, this was a very cozy vibe. I loved the rest of the town folk that they interacted with and the relationships that they developed with them. The mage also is bonded with a griffin, who is not like a main character in here, but there is a bit of a plot line with them that I really enjoyed. A lot of this story is kind of little vignettes of their life rather than one cohesive narrative, but it does kind of wrap up at the end. Although this is, I believe, the first in a series. I don't think this was groundbreaking by any means, but if you are looking for something cozy for the autumnal season and you like magic and griffins and tea shops and books, then the vibes of this really are impeccable for that. So that is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne. So those are all the books that I read and DNF'd in August. It was such a month of extremes. It was either books that I really couldn't get through or books that I absolutely loved. A couple in between, but I think it was all worth it for the two books in there that I absolutely adored, and I am now feeling a lot more motivated to properly get back into my reading and find something that's gonna hook me in that same way. Especially reading physically, because I read The Tainted Cup physically when I've been reading a lot of audiobooks so far this year. It reminded me how good it can feel to properly just sit down with a book and devour it. So fingers crossed, September is going to be a great reading month. Please let me know how your August went with your reading. Did you find anything that gave you that joy and thrill for reading, or were you struggling a little bit like I was at the start of the month? Either way, I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I hope that September's reading is going to go incredibly well for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye.